Hey everyone, this is Kamran. Welcome to part 4 of building a React application. This is the final part of the series where we're going to work on the GitHub API. So we are going to show the listing from the actual projects on GitHub. Also, we're going to work on the filters. So whenever you change the language from here or you change the date group from here, we're going to fetch and show the repositories. Also, we're going to work on the button. So whenever you click this, we are going to reload the next group and show the listing. I've done some changes to our feed component. So just like we did with the view type, I've added two new state variables for the date jump and the language. For date jump, we have the default value set to day, and we are passing these props to our filters component. So whenever the language is changed, we are setting the language, and when the date jump is changed, we are setting the date jump. Inside the filters, we are simply receiving these props and we are using them on the filters that we have. So on the language select drop down, whenever the language is changed, we simply call the on language change with the value, and same for the date filter. So whenever the date jump is changed, we change the on date jump and pass it the day, week, month or year based on the selection of the user. Before we start, we're going to play with the dates a lot. So I'm going to install the moment for that. So yarn add moment. Also, we're going to use the HTTP calls. So for that, I have a special hook that I'm going to install called use-http. So now that both of are installed, I can close the terminal, and I'm going to create two new state variables called start date and the end date, which are going to be the dates for which we're going to fetch the repositories from GitHub. For the end date, our initial value is going to be for yesterday because we're going to fetch all the repositories till the last day. And for start date, we are not sure because it depends upon the day or the date jump that we have selected. So for example, if it is going to be day, then it is going to be 2 days before. But if it is month, then it is going to be a month before, and same for the year. So for the end date, let's put here moment dot subtract. I'm going to subtract 1 day from today, and we are going to format to get the string. Also, let's import moment, and for the start date, I'm going to put an empty string for now. Now let's work on the date jump, so which is this one. So whenever the user will pick one of the options from here, we are going to recalculate our start date and the end date because we are going to fetch the repositories based on that. So for that, I'm going to listen to the changes in the date jump variables. So we will add a use effect, and we are going to add the dependency of the date jump here. And inside that, our end date is going to become again this one, because we are going to reset it and refetch the repositories from the beginning. And our start date is going to be moment. We're going to use the end date and subtract from here 1 and the date jump. So which means is that if the user selects a month, so we are going to have the end date of yesterday, and the start date is going to be yesterday minus 1 month. If it becomes year, we are going to subtract 1 year from the yesterday. I'm going to console log the start and the end dates, and let's see what do we have here. So end date and the start date. Go back to the browser. Now if we change the value for our date jump to a week, so our end date has become 12th of June, so which is yesterday, and our start date is 7 days before that. If I select month from here, our end date is again yesterday, and our start date is 30 days before that. And same for the year. So our end date is yesterday, and our start date is 1 year before that. So next, I'm going to get rid of the console log that we added, and I'm going to put the setters for the end date and the start date. And now we need to make the API call to fetch the repositories whenever our start date or the end date changes. So for that, I'm going to use the use HTTP package that we installed. So the way it works is it gives us a hook called use fetch. Use fetch accepts the endpoint, the URL that we are going to call. In our case, it is going to be api.github.com. And it gives us back a couple of variables. So first of all, we have the loading, which is a boolean that tells us whether there is any API call in progress or not. Error tells us whether there was any error in the API call. And the last one that we are going to put is the get, so which is the HTTP method that we are going to use for fetching the data. Next, we need to listen to the changes in the start date. So I'll add a use effect, and we are going to listen to the start date variable. And whenever it changes, we are going to make the API call here. So first of all, I'm going to put the check here. If we don't have the start date, we don't proceed. And the second thing we are going to do is we are going to call get. So this method that we had from use HTTP, inside that we are going to pass here search slash repositories, and we are going to do .then because it is a promise, and we have a res here, and I'm going to do a console log just to see if we are getting the response properly or not. And now if we go to the browser and check the console, we do have an API call, but we've got the validation failed error because we are not passing the query parameter. So we need to send the dates and the language. So for that I'm going to go back to the editor and create a variable called const filters, and we need to do the transformation of the filters in the special format that GitHub accepts. So I have a function here called transform filters. I'm going to pass it the language, start date and the end date, and I'm going to put the function outside our component here called transform filters, and what it is doing is it is accepting these three parameters, and it is creating this special format for the language if it is there, and for the date adding the sort of the stars, and the order is descending, and it is returning from here the transform filters object. Now we need to go back to the call that we had. So now we need to convert this filters object to the query parameters. So for that I'm going to use the const filters query, and we are going to use the built-in JavaScript class called URL search params. You pass it the filters object and you need to convert it to string. It will give us the query parameters in the form of a string, and we need to pass it to the API call that we are doing in the form of filters query, and put a question mark here. And now if we go back to the browser and refresh, if you look at the repositories, you will see that we are passing the query string in the format that GitHub wants, and we're passing the correct dates, which is yesterday and the day before that, because we have selected day here. And if we look at the preview, we do have the repositories in the response. And also if we now change the date jump from here, let's say I pick month, I have another API call. If I pick year, I have another API call with the correct date sent in the query parameters 2019 to 2020, and we do have the response in the result. And that's because of the other use effect that we added on the date jump here. So if you see here, use effect on the date jump is setting the end and the start dates, and on the start date we are listening and making the API call. That's why we are getting the results on each date jump change. Also we need to look for the changes in the language and make the API call. So for now, if you pick JavaScript, we don't have any API calls. So for that we are going to add the language state variable in this listener also. So whenever the language is changed, we are going to reset the start and the end dates, and so we are going to make the API call here. And now if I go back to the browser and refresh and pick from here, let's say JavaScript, we have an API call with language set to JavaScript. And if I put, let's say, Rust here, we have another API call with the language set to Rust. Now we need to get the response of this API call, and we need to show this data in the components that we have for the repositories. So for that I'm going to add a new state variable called repositories, where the default value set to empty array for now. And whenever we get the response from the API call, I'm going to call the set repositories, and I'm going to pass the existing list of repositories that we have, and another object where we'll put the start and the end dates, because we are going to show the title with the start and the end dates on top of the repository group, and items is going to be res.items. And now we need to render these repositories in the components that we have. So for that, first of all, if we go down, we need to fix the group title. So it has to accept the start and the end dates and render that. So for that, I'll go in the group title and I will add two new props here, start date and the end date. And we are going to check here if we don't have any of these, we are simply going to return from here null. And then we need to modify the start date and put here the humanized date format. So I will need moment for that. So const start moment is moment of start date, and we'll also put end moment is moment of end date, and we're going to import moment from moment. And for this one, for the title, we are going to put here start moment dot from now, and for this one we are going to simply put the normal date formatting with year, month and date. Okay, now that our group heading is ready, now we need to render the repository listing in the feed component that we have. So first of all, in the feed component, I'm going to get rid of all the repositories that we added, and I'm going to put a map here on the repositories.map. It is going to give us the repo group and the counter, and inside that we are going to return this grid component that we have here. And also we are going to put a box around it, because we are also going to have the group heading for the group. So in here I'm going to add the group title, and group title is going to accept the start date, which is repo group dot start date, and end date is going to be repo group dot end date. And now the group heading is rendered. We need to render the items inside that also, so we use this start date and the end date. Now we need to use the items, so I will go down again, and in here I will do repo group dot items dot map repo, and we are going to render this repo from here in front of it. Also in our repo component we are going to accept a prop called repo, and we are going to use this repo to show the title and the image and all the repo details in the repository component, and we are going to pass this repo in the repo component with the repo prop. And now if you go back to the browser, we have a bunch of problems here. So first of all, we had a group title in front of the filters, which is not there anymore. So to fix this, I'm going to go back in front of the filters, and in the group title I'm going to pass here the start and end dates from the first group that we have got from the repositories. So this fixed our title, but now we have the duplicate titles here, so we need to remove this title unless we are second or greater repository group. So to fix this, I'm going to go inside the loop that we have and remove this from here, and I'm going to put a variable here called group title. It is going to be available if the counter is greater than 0, and we're going to put the group title here like this. And now if we check the browser, now our repository listing is good. So next we need to work on the load next group button. So when the user clicks this button, we are going to load the next group of listings based on the next date that is available. So to do that, I'll go back to the button that we have, and we'll add the listener with the on click. And when the user clicks this button, we are going to set the end date is going to be the previous start date, and our start date is going to be moment start date, and we are going to subtract from it 1 and that date jump. And also we're going to convert to string using the format. Chakra comes with a built-in prop on the button called isLoading, which will show a spinner if it is true. So I'm going to use the loading prop from the useFetch to show the spinner if we have the loading list. And now if we go to the bottom of the screen and we click this button load next group, you will see that it is showing the spinner and it is loading the next group. So first group was from 11 to 12 and the last one is from 10 to 11. If we click again, this will be from 9 to 10 and so on. And now if we go up and we change the date filter, let's say I put week, we have a problem that we are not resetting the listing of the repositories. To reset that, I'm gonna go inside my code base and go to the use effect that we had on the date jump and the language, and here I'm going to clear the repository that we have shown. So whenever the language or the date is changed, we are going to clear the repository listing and refetch. Now go to the browser, and if we change the, let's say, date jump to be monthly, so it has reset everything and now it is showing the month ago. So this one is from a month ago, and if we click the next group, it is going to be from 2 months ago and so on. So next if we go up and if we, let's say, change the language to be JavaScript, it is refetching the new projects for the JavaScript language. But we have a slight problem. Whenever we change the language or we change the filter from here, it goes empty for some time and then the new repositories are shown. To fix this, I have added a new component called page loader, which is just a flex which is full width and spans the full page. Position is fixed and the background is white, and inside that we have a spinner. So we are going to show this if we don't have any repositories and the page is loading. So I'm going to go inside my component of feed and I'm going to put the check that if we don't have any repositories and the page is loading, just show the loader. Now if you go to the browser and refresh, you will see that we have the initial spinner and then we have the repository listing. And if we change the period, again we have the spinner and the listing. Go down, click the next group, we have this spinner and the next listing. The next and the final step is populating the actual data in the repo components. So we were already passing the repo to the repo component. I went ahead and populated all the fields. So for example, image is from the repo.owner.avatar URL, login is from there, the repo description is from repo.description and so on. Now if you go back to the browser and refresh, you see that we are showing all the actual projects, and if you click anything, it takes you to the actual project page. And if you click the username, it takes you to the user profile. Also we have the star count, the issues count and the forks count. And if you click the list view, we have the list view showing up. Go down, click the next group, we have the previous day for the different listing and so on. And also if we click from here the JavaScript, we have the JavaScript project in the list view. If we click grid, we have the same listing in the grid view. And if you pick from here yearly, we have the JavaScript projects that were trending in the last year. And with that, our series and our lesson comes to an end. If you have any questions or comments or feedback, leave them below, and I will see you in the next lesson.